Welcome everyone to the this modeling user group meeting, September 23rd. And it looks like it's going to be a relatively smaller meeting, but as I mentioned to everyone else before, this meeting is being recorded. So it will have a life beyond the people that are here. So that's always good. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Annabelle Lee Enriquez, and I am with the Getty Conservation Institute. And we normally do introductions at the beginning. And so this is not going to take a long time because we don't have as many people today. So we started the modeling user group to have a way for Arches community members to ask questions, ask specifically modeling questions, and learn more about modeling using Arches, or modeling for Arches. Both modeling using Arches and modeling for Arches implementations, but also to learn more about modeling in general, what good data modeling practices there are, and just good knowledge organization practices. And generally in these meetings, we have a presentation. And today's presentation will be by Alyssa Loera, of my colleague at Getty Digital here at the Getty, and George Bruseker, who is the CEO of Takin.Solutions, one of our Arches service providers. And they'll be presenting OGEE Arches. It's just a starter package / application of models that are CIDOC, CRM, or Conceptual Reference Model compliant, as well as linked art. There's no dot anymore, right? It's just linked art, right?
Really?
So it's
I missed that. Interesting.
Yeah.
At least that's this. It seems
Scrap the presentation. We have to get rid of the dot.
If it's still linked.art, I will still say that. But I've noticed when I go to the websites, it seems like the styling is a little bit different on linked art. So that is the larger introduction for what this group is and for me. And I will go ahead and start. So we normally do our introductions popcorn style. So I will start, and I'll popcorn it over to Alyssa to introduce herself.
Sure, yeah. So like Annabelle said, I'm Alyssa Loera, and I work at the Getty in the Getty Digital department, specifically under what's called our collection systems group. And Arches is one of the systems that we use, and we use it as kind of a system of record. And we have like staff dedicated to the administration and development of that. But my role in it is to sort of translate JSON modeling or other kind of modeling into the Arches modeling layer. And I'll popcorn it over to George.
So my name is George Bruseker, and I run this company, Takin.Solutions, that helps institutions that we work with apply semantic data solutions, which usually ends up in Arches for doing the actual data management. So we help with data modeling, semantic data modeling, and semantic data transformation, and setting up systems to manage semantic data. I'm also a co-chair of the CIDOC CRM SIG, and so I'm interested in that capacity of trying to support creating the ontologies that allow semantic data expression and creating reusable data, and a chair of the Arches Resource Modeling Working Group, whose goal is to take that kind of work and make solid packages and patterns that will allow people to take Arches as an application and start from a strong basis in the first place, and then go forward. And so that's kind of a motivation behind OGEE in the first place. And I will pass it over to Jake.
Hi there. New face. I know I attended my first users group meeting a week or so ago and trying to find where I belong. I might be in this group. I'm a data engineer consultant background, do a lot of master data management work. I'm brand new to the heritage information management space, and I've found Arches, love it so far. I'm working through it, figuring out how it works. I'm kind of geeking out on all the bits and bytes underneath, and so that's a lot of fun. So I'm just here to learn. I don't want to distract. Unfortunately, I do have to leave early. I have a class. I'm a student as well. I attend Oxford and doing some architectural history classes there, and so I'm learning a lot and just glad to be here and meet everyone. David, I remember you from last the user group meeting, so I'll popcorn to you.
Thank you, Jake. Good to see you again. I'm David Myers. I'm Annabelle's colleague at the Getty Conservation Institute, part of the Arches department there. So let me pass it on to Kelly.
Hello, I am Kelly, and I study knowledge organization and management, and in my doctorate, I developed one ontology for organization the cultural heritage lawyers.
Thank you. Do you want to pass it over to somebody else? I'll choose for you. How about Mike?
Thanks, Annabelle. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Hayworth. I'm currently in London in the Arcadia office. Arcadia is a funding body, and we support a whole range of projects that are working around the world to document heritage sites using Arches. And currently, we're thinking a lot about what the data models are that those projects have used and the vocabularies that they're using. As with many others, I'm here to learn a bit more and to help me to understand what some of the key issues are. Let me pass it over to Jana.
Hi everyone, I'm Jana from Flax and Teal, and I am information scientist. So I usually take care of the client and their needs and just apply it onto Arches. And I'll pass it on to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I also work on the Arches project over at the Getty Conservation Institute. I'm a professional fellow. I'm about 3 months into my time here, and I'm very interested in metadata and learning more about modeling. So I'm excited to be here. I'll pass it over to Sarah. I think you just joined. We're just introducing ourselves.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Delgadillo. I'm with the Office of Historic Resources, Los Angeles City Planning, heading Historic Places LA for our office. And is there anything else I need to add to that? Apologies for being tardy.
Oh, no, that's quite all right, Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah, just our normal introductions.
Cool. Okay, I'll popcorn it over to George if he hasn't yet gone.
Oh, he's gone. You're the last person.
Oh, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. So that takes care of our introductions. And so the other thing that we have on the agenda, the next thing is any announcements that anyone might have regarding modeling, or actually anything Arches related. Might be your only user group that you take part in. On behalf of the GCI team at in regards to Arches, we do have a community call next week that will be focusing on Arches for Science and the Arches. And you might be aware that there is a new interactive demo for Arches for Science version 2. And this is a interactive demo that you can use to explore Arches for science in particular. And even if you're not involved in heritage science, it is I think it is something that is worth it to take a look at, to explore, because there are a lot of features in Arches for Science that are not present in if you were to install Arches and use it as the core Arches. There are a lot of features there that are baked in that are part of Arches for Science that are not part of any other Arches applications. And yeah, yes, Yana, the call will be, that call will also be recorded. So if you can't make it during that time, which is October 2nd at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. British summer time, and you can extrapolate the times all the other times. But yeah, so that is that will be happening next week. David, are there any other announcements that we'd like to make? I don't think there are.
Not that I can think of, but we always like to plug that we're planning on having a next Arches news bulletin sometime around November, maybe late November. And we're always looking for new news items, including about implementations, about other work, whether it's articles, presentations, could be anything Arches related.
Yeah. Probably something good to note is that I believe at least our plan is that at the end of this month, September, so next week as well, that we'll be releasing some of these some new extensions for that are kind of companions to Arches version 8. And so some of these extensions will be coming out next week. So just be on the lookout for the announcement regarding that, and with that announcement, probably some information on what those extensions are. So yeah, and yes, George.
I have an announcement when your announcement is.
Okay, yeah, oh, okay, got it. All right, yes, what's the announcement?
Well, it's just to mention that the CIDOC CRM SIG is happening next month in Crete, but it's as usual as for the last few years, hybrid and online, and it's entering an interesting phase as Martin Doer, who is the chair for 20 plus years, is no longer going to be the chair. And we're going to write bylaws and set up the sort of groundwork for a democratic election of chairs and so on and so forth. So members of the CRM SIG, which include which is institutional. So GCI, for example, is one, but GDI, for example, is not, although it could be, are able to vote on these matters and express themselves. So it might be worth looking into that, attending at least in a hybrid fashion if you're interested in such issues. And if you're not a member of the CRM SIG, but you're interested in the sort of fundamental layer of the ontology for expressing the data, and whether that's from building the ontology or having an opinion on the technical way it should be serialized or whatever, or that sort of thing. Everybody is welcome to join the organization, and in order to do so, all you have to do is write a letter saying, our institution wants to participate, and we will do so, and then you will be approved, and then you'll become a voting member. So if that's, it can have quite some impact on an Arches project, how the CIDOC CRM as a common language for data expression evolves. It can have an impact on technical aspects, et cetera, of your project. So it's worth knowing about and participating in if it's of interest to you.
Thank you, George. That's actually very interesting that that new layer of structure is going to be added. And maybe I'll just risk the lack of sleep to take part in that meeting.
Yeah, and it's important because I mean, we're just there have been no rules, and there are no rules in CIDOC. There are no like very set up rules in ICOM, so we're establishing our own rules for ourselves. And so that means that, it requires, people to think out all the angles and to, understand. So, especially like the experience of working on setting up, Arches working groups, etc., would be like, you already know the angles, for example, of like different considerations for what happens when X and Y and Z. So that would be valuable, perspectives to bring to the conversation.
Yes, and as a reminder, if you need a refresher on the CIDOC CRM, George gave a presentation on that, I think during the first Arches modeling user group meeting. Was it the first or the second? And all of our meetings were recorded, so you can go back, or you can go to the CIDOC CRM website to learn more. There's lots of resources there. Okay, so let's segue into learning more about this Arches package that expresses the CIDOC CRM and linked art. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and start it. Wait, first of all, before we start, are there any other announcements? I don't want to cut anyone off. Nope. Okay. So let's have our presentation then by Alyssa and George on OGEE Arches. So Alyssa, I think you're starting.
Yeah, I will share my screen so we can look at these slides. Okay, so there's a little bit of browser ephemera there, but I think it's a little easier to look at than flipping in and out of the presentation, but hopefully you can see the presentation in the screen. Good. Okay, wonderful. So we're here to talk about OGEE Arches. Thank you for your willingness to listen to this presentation and learn a little bit about it. I know we did some introduction at the beginning, so I'll just, I guess, contextualize that by saying that, George and his group have been deeply involved in large-scale open data projects at the Getty, and I started a few years ago. And got to start working with him, and he was tasked with really helping me understand and learn about linked open data and practical methods of application. And so we decided to work on this project specifically as a means to get some hands-on experience for me, both with the ontologies and with the Arches software, but that led to this more formal and what we think is useful output. Yeah, so what is OGEE Arches? It's a set of files or a package. It can be configured alongside an Arches deployment in that package part of the stack. And it includes preset resource models and some business data, and then concepts and collections, making it so your Arches designer and your reference data manager are set up in full with the linked art / CIDOC CRM data model structure. And I'm not sure what the familiarity is with linked art in this group, but it's really a linked open usable data model to describe cultural heritage and mostly artworks, but also some archives and some bibliographic materials. And that comes into play a lot at the Getty because we have not only this huge swath of artworks, but we have our research library and a huge archival collections and such. So it's nice that it accommodates some of that in the data model. And functionally, the project is meant to act as a starter resource for those building linked open data and those who are using or would like to learn more about linked art in practice. And it can be extended or pruned in order to meet the needs of various sizes of data projects. And the term OGEE itself is a shape. It's a sort of S shape that you see throughout the history of architecture and textiles. And when you put two of them together, it makes an OGEE arch. So we thought it was sort of fitting for this project because it's an arches. And so the needs or the gaps that seem to exist when trying to work with art-oriented linked open data is that there's somewhat of a high barrier to entry to implement. I'm sure some of you have experienced this. But also linked data in practice crosses so many domains, like you're really trying to approach the ontologist and a developer and researchers and technical users mixed with non-technical users, and ensuring that all parties are speaking the same model language can sometimes seem a little out of reach. But the idea behind OGEE is to take some of that difficulty out of starting a linked art compatible data project using Arches specifically, and by providing a complete set of models envisioned by that linked art schema and setting them up in a ready to use fashion. So trying to bridge that gap. And we're offering it up in GitHub as an open source resource for any institution or individual to adopt as a way to kickstart their projects. It's not a prescription for how to use all of linked art. And it's not like how linked art should look or can work, and it's not a place where Getty modeling extensions or nuances are tracked or maintained or anything like that, but rather a tool for learning and a practical application. We'd like to characterize the project as one using a documentation first approach. And that's because it kind of had to be, and maybe George will speak to this later too, but it really needed to be in order to maintain a sane way to build out such a large structure, both comprehensively and accurately. And the documentation part fits with that Arches part quite well, because Arches allows you to save repeatable patterns and implement them over and over again. And we've created and named and documented these patterns. And we've created a representation of each linked art pattern following consistent human readable formats and able to be implemented in your Arches layer with that human readable text, which is nice. And the documentation method that we use is something called semantic reference data modeling. And the tool used to house all that documentation is called CIDOC. It's actually a really beautiful, robust tool that George's team has been working on for a long time now. And it's kind of a really amazing way to be able to hold so much information about data model structures. I have a few things pulled up here, but for instance, this is like part of what we're going to look at later on today, but these are various collections that make up models. And this is just what CIDOC looks like for one project, but you can enter it from the front end and look at various projects. But this is how this documentation existed, and we were able to really go off of this to build the modeling in Arches. So that's why we consider it like documentation first. Yeah, and so that documentation portal allows each user group to see what they need to see and has sort of a bridge to connect with each group to understand what they see and how they use data. Like, for example, there's ways to look at it semantically, but then there's ways to look at the same data model from the JSON LD perspective, or from the Turtle RDF perspective, or even from like the visual kind of mermaid diagram. And so that we kind of think of that as one of the better, or one of the more interesting outcomes of this OGEE project, is having that robust data set alongside the actual practical package. And the semantic reference data modeling, or SRDM, as a method involves leveraging reproducibility and reusability. Metadata application profiles like linked art use logical and consistent patterns. For instance, you're kind of using like the collection name to describe many different things, people, physical objects, but it's still the same structure as dictated by the linked art profile. And therefore it's amenable to being grouped into collections, and those collections into models. And like the ever relevant IKEA instructions, the little pieces make up the parts and the parts make up the whole. So that's kind of the idea behind the way that the fields have been grouped into collections, and the collections have then been grouped into these 11 models. And the things that we call collections and are set up in CIDOC as such are also then set up as branches in Arches, so that they exist as kind of neutral branches that you can then attach to different models and nodes. Yeah, and so as I was mentioning earlier, the documentation for these patterns is housed in CIDOC, a platform and tool that acts as a documentation bridge between the Arches user, the developer, the semanticist. And not only do you have the patterns in many modes at your fingertips, but when you're installing the Arches package or Arches application, you inherit a really readable and consistent naming pattern it makes the resource models incredibly trackable. And we're at the Getty, we work with really large scale data sets in our Arches instances. Some of them are small, but some of them are huge, like millions. And without this naming convention, I think I would personally lose my mind. It would be really difficult to maintain consistency across our instances, especially when we're talking about using different APIs to load data and wanting really to make that an efficient process. And so this is a side-by-side look at what the documentation and the model looks like in OGEE versus how it's implemented in Arches. And we'll walk through a little bit of demo stuff later so you can kind of see that in action. Oh, sorry, I think I skipped one. Yeah, so here's the model to the model in Arches, and then this is what a branch in Zalige looks versus a branch in Arches. Okay, and so ultimately, OGEE is made up of 11 models, and they're constructed using 56 branches or collections, encompassing 650 plus fields. They're all consistently named, all set up and usable for the data entry layer, and able to be deleted if you aren't intending on using every aspect of linked art. So the idea was to give the whole of linked art to the user, but then let them pare it down to really suit their specific data project and still let it be pretty clean and readable. Okay, so along the outcome of this being those 11 models with that comprehensive documentation, so the ontology pattern, the JSON LD, the graph, the turtle, RDF stuff, as well as the data entry and the designer components ready for Arches installation. And we put together this table to kind of represent, like, these are the models that we have. This is the type of model. The documentation here points to like the specific Zalige documentation. So here's a physical object model, and you can see these are all the fields that are involved, but then they're grouped into these collections based on that semantic reference data model method. And you get all of this information included, and it's generated really nicely in George's site. And then along with all of that Zalige documentation, you can also compare that to the CIDOC CRM ontology. So that's where all these links go to, and we can send this over for you to click around on at some point. But I just wanted to show too that, like, the data entry example ends up looking like this. So your model, when you deploy the package with your Arches instance, this is what like your physical object model would already look like. And then from the resource, the designer, the Arches designer point of view, this is the model as it would look as well. And you can see that the naming convention is pretty easy to follow. And if you expand it, you can see that it really is like every piece of linked art down to like a certain level of the nesting. You could really keep going, especially when you're doing something like name, like a name has a name has a name. But we really try to do it to, like, I think the second level or so of nesting in terms of how that model breaks down. And then from the search perspective, if you load the OGEE package, then you will also get some sample data, which I'll talk a little bit about too. Oops. Yeah, so along with the models, there's a bit of sample data in there to help really demonstrate some patterns in the search layer and the data entry layer. Right now we have the Frida Kahlo set, which kind of tests and shows the details of the modeling. I think it fills out most of the fields, so you can really see how dense you can make your modeling efforts or your information description efforts. And then the Getty Irises set only uses some of the modeling because that's the level we've chosen to locally go with for our museum collection modeling. It's sort of demonstrating that you can use as little as you want as well. And the file structure and the sample data are all part of the GitHub repository. And we originally set these up in Arches 6.0, but with the help of Annabelle's team, we were able to port it over to 7.6 compatibility as well. And then so we came out of this project with some successes and some challenges. It provides multiple approaches to linked art modeling for different user groups. I think the documentation really speaks to that. It provides like a true implementation layer of linked art for researchers. So you can, if you loaded that up and you wanted researchers to kind of navigate it, they could use an Arches instance with the package loaded fairly easily. Creates a starting off point for elaborating and moving past just the model of linked art and into the actual data part of it, the data management part. It reduces complexity by showing only what you need and what you're implementing in your decisions and your patterns. So like I mentioned before, you can kind of prune it down and have it be this sort of really efficient representation of your data or the way your data is modeled. And there's huge open source community support for both the Arches end and the linked art end. Linked art is a pretty big community that meets every 2 weeks and sort of goes back and forth about the model and really works alongside CIDOC CRM SIG and stuff. So it's nice to have that kind of long-term stability baked in when you have those, ground up communities. And then I'd say some of the challenges are generating awareness. I think, it's a little bit of a niche piece of our already kind of niche field. So just trying to get it to the right people is where we're at now. And then enabling a quick implementation can be difficult because you have to have that Arches configuration mindset already. You have to know what you're doing there, and you have to kind of understand how the package fits into the full stack. And then versioning alongside linked art changes is difficult too. When we first built this, we were looking at, it was like December 2023 is when we said we're going to stop moving with linked art because we need to finish and package this up. And since then they've moved to linked art 1.0. So there's some stuff that doesn't quite match up with linked art 1.0, but it's minimal and it's sort of like not the true aim of the project. I think really we just want folks to have the ability to work with this type of data modeling in the first place. So we just try to make that explicit. And then from there, I'm going to let George do a little demoing of what we got. If there's any questions right now, though, feel free to raise hands or.
Otherwise, I'll start sharing screen. Visible? Yeah. Thanks, Alyssa. It is, a pleasure to do a project with somebody else so that you can listen to them describe it better than you could describe it yourself. So thanks, Alyssa, for setting the framework here. And we're a small group, and I think we all have some pretty high level knowledge of Arches. So with that sort of intro, what I kind of want to do is just give just a feeling of why we want OGEE to be there and what we hope it can help people do, whether they're trying to learn semantics or they're just trying to roll out a semantic platform using Arches more efficiently or what have you. And so I have this scenario, but I'm not going to go through and do it exactly. I just want to like take a step back and say like, and of course Annabelle could tell this story better, but Arches as a platform and as a community has been something that's been supported from the start, with this idea of this is work for cultural heritage and for conserving cultural heritage and applying standards. And so the whole reason of doing this entire project was to try to create something that was a universally reusable, using best practices kind of software and initiative. And so in that early phase, it was decided that in addition to using vocabularies for standardizing data, that for data structuration, ontologies would be used because they provide the best possibility of creating ready to go integrated data across projects, so that if I'm institution X or you're in institution Y, that we can both load up our arches, and at the end of the day, we could, we could archive that data somewhere, and it would have like a pretty high level of compatibility out of the box because we both use the same ontology, and so away we go. And in the world that we live in now, circa 2025 and also circa 2015 or 2010 or whatever, CIDOC CRM is this conceptual reference model from ICOM, which is a well thought through and bought into ontology for representing cultural heritage data semantically. So it's data that explains itself because the data structure itself is a model of what people say in this domain. So what people document. They document objects, they document events, they document people. And these are the kinds of things they say about them. So the dream is we've got the software, we boot up the ontology, which is represented in a certain kind of file, an RDF or an OWL file, and then we can build our data structure with that and things will match up. And that would be great, except for it requires more knowledge than that. And that's really where we sort of step into the scene. So, all this investment is made into building Arches as a great software, and it can do designing with the semantics, and it can do all sorts of search and visualization, et cetera, But when you get it in its core version, you might have an ontology installed, you might not, you might install the ontology, but then you have to make all these decisions about how I'm going to build my data models, and then that's a whole process. And so in this slide that we're looking at, we have like a really typical sort of scenario of whether I'm an end user or whether I'm somebody who's in a project, like a project that's been funded to do some work on sites in some difficult place in the world. You come to similar questions again. Oh, we have people that we're documenting, and they have things like names and birthplaces, etc. And then you don't have Arches doesn't tell you to do anything, but it does give you the possibility to use semantics. So then you're faced with these questions. Well, how do I build a model that represents the name of a person and a person as such and their nationality, et cetera, et cetera? So that's a bunch of questions that come up. And so when you're trying to answer that, one way and the hard way, and if you like this way, an interesting way, is to go back to basics and say, well, the reason that ontologies are chosen is because they're supposed to be a common language where domain specialists, i.e. cultural heritage researchers, could look at this data standard and figure out how to apply it and build this data structure with it. Am I still there? Because my image went away, but you can still hear me? Okay, super. So the hard way to do it is to go to the website of CIDOC CRM, and you have the problem set like, how do I build a model that represents this data? And then you start learning about semantics, or the person that you've tasked with doing data engineering, like Jake, for example, or what have you. He goes, or she goes, and they go to the ontology, to the CIDOC CRM site, they figure out how it works, they figure out that, oh, the ontology explanation that's easiest to read is here. They look around, they can do some searching, they can find out for things like, oh, there's a class in this ontology that's called person. Is that useful to me? They read this description, they find out, yes, it is. And then they have to start answering the next question, which is like, okay, I can build a data model for people. Now I need to also figure out how to model the name. And so they go through that, and that's entirely possible, and it has value in it itself. Like if you're, if you want to learn the ontology, or you want to, think things through again from the start, that can be interesting. But most of the time, to be fair, to be honest, in my opinion, it's a complete waste of time, because these are answered questions. The ontology is there. There's best practice. And so it would be good to just use somebody's solution. Some people have been thinking about solutions. Alyssa's referenced to it a number of times. There's a project, and it's not the only one, but it's a very important one and very worth your time and reference, linked art, which has gathered together, a coalition of museums. And that's an interesting like parenthesis because museums have a certain interest, so they want to model certain things, and that's what we've done. That's what they've done with linked art, and that's what we're doing with OGEE. But if you were modeling something slightly different, then you might want to have a slightly different coalition to come up with different patterns, but again, implement them in documentation and then as a package or an application in Arches for a particular use case. So the sort of second way to go through is to say, okay, well, I've heard about CIDOC CRM, and I'd like to use that as my base, but me or the person I've hired doesn't have time to figure out semantics from the start. So let me go to a smart group that has some good ready-made solutions and figure out how they do things. And then you come to a website like this, and it has some great human readable text, and we can look around and see what we need to do. And oh, look, I want to model people. There's even a section called people in organizations. And I can go through and I can start seeing some data examples. And I can probably, and the second example I come upon is names. So in terms of trying to model my Trotsky information here, I'm actually off to the races. So it's pretty good. But this, just like the CIDOC CRM site, which is giving me the highest level of abstraction, there are classes and properties. This is some way to model data. I get more concrete over here on the linked art website because I'm now getting some text that's really telling me what I'm doing, how I should do it. There's something about monkey selfies. We ignore that. It's an interesting sidebar if we don't want to carry on with our boring modeling task right now. And then we can use this as an example, but still, there's nothing ready-made in my hand. I'm ready and raring to go. I want to have a project where I'm doing cultural heritage data, I'm documenting Trotsky, and I don't want to go through all this rigmarole just to get to a place where people have already got. So that's basically where OGEE comes in. So in the OGEE way, we've done the hard part. We understand the semantics. We understand how to read the documentation of linked art, and we've retranslated it in a slightly more readable fashion in our way. And what we've done is create a package which has translated that into functioning models that cover this range that linked art wants to cover, which is basically the, let's say, 70 to 80% of like standard things you're going to cover in cultural heritage. There are people, there are places, there are physical things, there are documents that describe them, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of questions that you could lose time, money, and inspiration on by trying to solve when they're already there. So the idea of OGEE is please don't solve those problems that are already solved and are ready to take off the shelf and just work with. And instead, focus on the things that are, and there certainly OGEE doesn't solve all the problems. CIDOC CRM doesn't solve all the problems. Linked art doesn't solve all the problems, but it has a 70 to 80% solution for basic stuff in cultural heritage, which can take your problem of, or your problem and your challenge of adopting Arches and using and doing open data and semantics and so on and so forth. Just install it and have that ready, and then you can start learning from the package. So you could say, well, I want to do, it has something for people and it has something for physical objects, but it doesn't have something for sites in the sense of archaeological sites. I want to work more on that. Well, then you can start using it as a learning tool. You can start using the patterns, and you can copy and paste them within the program and add more into that. So you can spend your intellectual and financial energy on the specific problems that you're an expert in, that matter, that are not covered, rather than reinventing the wheel of people have names and birth dates and stuff like that, which are very much solved and don't need to be solved again in the semantic world of CIDOC CRM. So if we want to look at that in practice, we have this test instance up for which we don't have the infrastructure for having a test instance like GCI has set up for Arches for Science, but at some point we will probably have that with GCI for OGEE as well. But this is to give you the look behind the scenes. So here is what that package looks like if you install it. And again, as Alyssa said, it's on GitHub, so it's just there. You can get it and install it. There are instructions on how to do it. And if we go and take a look at the back end, if I look at a model like person, then I can see that a full model has been implemented. I can use the Arches features for things like finding the branch. Then I'll say, oh, I was looking to do something about name. Here's something about name. And now if I'm looking at this as like an implementer, then I can take a look and see, oh, what do the semantics look like? What does it allow me to document? And I can say, oh, these cover me or they don't cover me, and I can do something about it. Over here, I can see what this is in the cards view. This is Arches 101, but I can, this is all set up with very nice human readable names instead of ontology names and that sort of thing. So I can see name of person is very clearly a data entry form for putting in the name of a person, and it allows me to move forward on that. So that is, so basically the idea of like starting from OGEE would be, I'm doing a new, cultural heritage project. I want to use Arches, and I'm not really outside of the mainstream. Like I'm probably going to have people and places and so on and so forth. Might as well start from installing this thing and then going through and saying, oh, well, this has a lot of fields to talk about people. But in fact, that's not the focus of my documentation at all. I only care about the fact that they have a name, an identifier, and they have a type. And the rest of this is irrelevant to me. I'll never document it. Then that's great. You could just go through and you could delete, 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 delete. Now you have a customized and perfectly linked art compatible and CIDOC CRM compatible and fair for eternal time data set because you adopted this model, which is already, pre-stamped as intellectually correct by many groups, et cetera, et cetera. Also, as Alyssa mentioned, we have this sort of setup of some sample data that we curated exactly for demonstrating the data patterns, et cetera, et cetera. So if things are seeming like, overly abstract as one's trying to think through these models, et cetera, then one can really go and open up an instance and see a pretty filled out record of an individual, in this case, Frida Kahlo. So, what does the name mean? Oh, well, here's a really good example. Frida Kahlo is a preferred term, and it has two parts, a first name and a last name. We start to see how the model is meant to be used via example. I know we're very close to time. I'm going to move on to the last part. And the other thing to point out is that, as Alyssa was saying, we use this sort of documentation first approach. So we've documented the patterns outside of Arches, but we use these as recipes to implement the Arches instance and to explain it. So it's a documentation that goes alongside it. And it's sort of geared more towards the data modeler at this point, although it could eventually be geared towards end users, like providing quite human readable explanations. So if one is going through and setting up a new system and trying to edit and say, I do need this, I don't need that, I want to add a pattern, I'm looking for a pattern, then this companion documentation is useful because you can go through and go to a model or to a branch and read definitions for what each model, branch, and field is meant to do. And you can search through them, so you can find out that, a name is the string value of a name attributed to a documented person. And you can see things like, this is the semantic path which you're supposed to implement. This is the kind of data value it involves, and so on and so forth. And so that we have time for some conversation at the end, I'll just jump on and say, why do we do this? And where do we think we're going? this is an open source project in line with Arches in general being open source. The idea is let this package be out there, let it hopefully be a starter for projects big or small that want to have semantic data that's really compatible. So you're saying, I'm installing this, and I have a wish in the back of my mind that I'll be able to interact my data with the Getty data because they're doing this and Yale's doing it. Well, that's the kind of thing that we want to like make much more likely in the near future rather than not. In more hopeful terms, I mean, this data now being well constructed should be something that we'd like to be able to push to larger repositories so that if the project ends and you no longer want to, not able to, whatever, run an Arches instance, that you could push the data out into Wikidata or Europeana or Zenodo or some sort of place where it is long-term archived and stored. I mentioned the data integration of trying to communicate beyond projects. So whether it's communicating to a large institution like the Getty or communicating across a lot of small projects that are doing similar things, we might want to do that. And finally, it's for that data literacy sort of use function for people to use it, download it, and understand semantics and how we create them. And so to stop and leave 5 minutes of conversation, here's some links for resources. So the application itself is stored on Getty's GitHub under an OGEE directory, and you can find it there. The Zellige documentation that we were talking about is also online, and you can find the link there. So I guess we'll pass these slides around. The sample instance that we have set up right now in it as an interim before we set up something more all dancing and singing with the GCI has a link there. And you can contact me or Alyssa if you want to get more information about what we've done and how it might be helpful to you.
Okay. Thank you, George. Thank you, Alyssa. I think that was really helpful and a really good presentation. Yeah, we have 4 minutes left in the time, but I did want to say George referenced the GCI putting together a demo site, and that is true. That is something now that we've got the now that we have the Arches for Science interactive demo site, we'll be setting up a demo site based on OGEE Arches, but also too a companion to that, which I think is going to be very exciting for a lot of people who don't have their own Arches implementations or memes. To have that set up is also a site, I guess, kind of a modeling site where the Arches designer is exposed, which is something that we've never had before, because obviously if you expose the Arches designer in any of our demo sites, then you're playing with fire, and you're basically allowing the entire demo site to be potentially hijacked by whatever someone does in Arches designer. But so those are two things that are on our slate to get going and have as resources for the Arches community in regards to modeling. So those are things that are coming up. Are there any questions for George or Alyssa in the time remaining?
Just wants to make an appearance.
Hello, Stilton. We should have had that at the beginning.
Are there any questions for Stilton?
If there are no questions, I do want to say that I do planning on having the next modeling user group meeting on December 16th. And that will, pretty sure there's going to be a deep dive into Arches for Science modeling. So if you attend the the October 2nd meeting, which is a community call on the Arches for Science interactive demo site, and you have questions about the modeling, that's something we'll probably go into in the next modeling user group meeting. And then probably after that, the next modeling user group meeting after that will probably be going into lingo models, which will coincide with the scheduled release of Arches Lingo. So we've got a lot of stuff going on in the Arches community, especially in regards to our all these new applications, and letting you all know what's underneath the hood. Great. And any other comments, questions? We did get to the modeling clinic, which is fine because no one submitted a question, but I do want to draw your attention to some modeling discussion on the Arches forum having to do with language and international localization. So that is there. If you go to the Arches community forum, there's been some discussion on the implications of language and localization on modeling. So that's something that you might want to check out. Thank you, Emily. All right. With that, thank you for attending and hope to see you December 16th. I will be sending out more information about that, about the agenda and the presentation for that meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.